Welcome to the 5 Live Boxing Podcast. Now, there was a massive fight in New York over the weekend at Madison Square Garden. In fact, in the basement, what used to be called the Felt Forum. And in this fight, an Australian called George Kambosos in town just to get a payday. Absolutely not. He ruined Teofimo Lopez. It was a massive, massive shock. And then this week coming up, there's a fantastic domestic light heavyweight rematch. Anthony Yarde against Lyndon Arthur. And then, this pod's been around since about 2017, early 2017. But the rivalry between Brook and Amir Khan, that goes back to about 2010. Well, it's been officially announced that they will fight in February of next year. What a lineup. What a show. And to add to it, and welcoming him back in from the cold, a man who we used to have on this pod a lot until he started, training champions and working with different channels, Mr. Andy Lee. Andy, I'm not sure where to start exactly. Let's start with the nice stuff. How have you been? How are you? And where are you? I'm
in Morecambe, and I'm very well, thank you very much. Here training with Joseph Parker and a few other guys, all preparing for big fights. Isaac Lowe, David Nika, Jordan Thompson, and life is good.
Jordan Thompson, that's Jeff Thompson's son, the cruiserweight who's about 6'8", 6'9", the incredible athlete.
That's right, former tennis star, now boxer. Yeah. Former star of the unlicensed boxing world as well, apparently. I just found out how to 8 licensed fights, so that's where he gets it from. Guy with huge potential, and in a hot division now in Britain, so he could make a mark there.
And an Olympian and Commonwealth Games champion, I think David Naika, the New Zealander, who's had a couple of pro fights, but I think he was allowed back into the Olympics, if I'm not mistaken, something along those lines. Is that correct?
Yeah, like a lot of them now, like a lot of the USA team. He had his pro fight, was allowed to go back and compete in the Olympics, won a bronze medal, is a gold medalist from the Commonwealth Games, and I think he plans to fight in the Commonwealth Games, the next one, which is in Birmingham.
Wow. In Birmingham next year.
Yeah, so he said him and Jordan had some fantastic spars so far. It's a pleasure just to watch them.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about Joseph Parker when we at the end of this pod and we look back on the heavyweights. But I've got to start in New York, and I've got to start with a guy that wasn't just a massive underdog. There's an underdog in gambling terms, but this was an odd fight because he was a mandatory challenger, George Kambosos. But absolutely nobody, I've gone back, I've searched, I've looked again, nobody gave him any chance against Teofimo Lopez. Now, the fight itself, Andy, it was an exceptional fight, an exceptional brawl. It was quite amazing. And we'll hear from Kambosos a little bit later in the pod. We'll get him on and have a chat with him. But were you shocked when you saw? Let's change that. How shocked were you when you saw the result?
Yeah, I haven't seen the whole fight. I woke up at, I think it was 4 a.m. on the Sunday morning and just switched it on and got the end of it, the last round, and then the announcement, and also the post-fight interview, which was interesting. But yeah, that was no one gave Kambosos a chance really. And listen. Who could be blamed for that, though? Because you have Teofimo Lopez coming off one of the best wins of all time, beating the legend, Vasily Lomachenko. And then you have Kambosos coming off the fight with Lee Selby.
A split decision.
When I watched that fight with Lee Selby in person, I was there that night on the end of Zora versus Usyk. I thought Selby won. That fight. And I think I got slated for saying he won the fight. And I must watch it back again, in the cold light of day, but I thought Selby won that fight. And now, so no one would give him, naturally wouldn't give him a chance going against Lopez, who seemed like, something really special before Saturday night.
No, not only did he seem like something special, you're absolutely right, because his victory, October 2020 against Lomachenko, that was not just a shock, it was a consummate, beautiful, wonderful, brilliant performance where, there were moments there where Lomachenko had no idea. Lomachenko was Lomachenko'd, to overuse an expression that's been used a lot since then. And you're absolutely right. I thought the Selby and Kambosos fight was a really competitive fight. I saw nothing in that fight from either of those two that was that would possibly have troubled Lomachenko, or in my opinion, troubled Lopez. And I'm like you, I had no problem with Selby getting that decision that night. I remember talking to Chris Sanago after the fight and Selby after the fight, and they were flabbergasted they hadn't got it. I didn't think they romped it, they walked away with it. But if they'd have got it, I'd have had no problem whatsoever. I had no big problem with George Kambosos getting it. So this is what I'm going to do, Andy. I'm going to do a bit of classic after timing, okay? Because why not? Now we're going to look for reasons and what went wrong. Now, it's too simple, in my opinion, to say that Lopez underestimated George Kambosos, because I think that's just too simple, because Lopez really stepped it up. He manages to drop Kambosos really heavily, I thought, in the 10th round. And he wins a lot of the rounds. I mean, it's still a tight fight. It's a 2-round fight, in my opinion, for Kambosos. So I don't think underestimate him completely covers what went wrong on the night. I think what happens, and as part of this, is that in the 9 months since this purse bid was won back in February, and it was Triller were involved. You remember that whole catastrophe? And in the end, Triller had to drop out and Matchroom came in as the second highest bid to stage the fight. And I think what happened there is that Lopez just listened to every single man and dog in the boxing business and any other business who just told him how easy the fight was going to be. Now that's almost a different disease to underestimating, Andy. Do you understand where I'm going with that?
Steve, the more time I spend in boxing, the more you realize how important the mentality is of a fighter going into any fight. How they think usually determine, like how the fighters think, usually determine who wins and loses the fight. No matter how talented you are or how you prepared, what's going on in between your ears has a big outcome on who wins the fight. And like the more when you're close to the boxers and close to know them personally, you can see who's you're almost going to win. And I think their mentalities and their expectations for the fight couldn't have been more different. In terms of Kambosos would have been expecting and knew he had to perform to the best of his ability to get anywhere close. And where Lopez, like you said, may have believed the hype, complacency, maybe weight issues as well. Generally, American fighters, they're not afraid of anyone, especially coming from Australia. And I think all of those things played into the hands of Kambosos. But the only one who did believe was himself. And we'll go back to the mentality and all of the talking he did, as much as he was never played the second fiddle once. He never played the opponent, never played, he was here to get a payday. He was there to win, believed it, and that's what showed in the fight.
And it's really interesting because we had him on the show 2 weeks ago. I got him in Miami at his training camp, where he'd basically been in and out of for 7 or 8 months. Because this fight had officially, if I'm not mistaken, 8 different dates and about 6 different locations. But he'd stayed focused in Miami, a long way from Sydney, a long way from his partner, a long way from his children, one of whom I think was born whilst he was in camp in Miami. I could be wrong about that, but it's something really close to that sort of situation. And he stayed focused. And when he spoke to us, as I say, I'm going to play the ultimate after timer here. He was so calm, so confident. He predicted a really hard, drawn-out fight where he would just about win on points. I mean, that's basically what he said to us. So I'm going to add to that, and it was something that I looked at again, the weigh-in and the face-to-face on Friday. Now, I know it's the weigh-in and the face-to-face. Now, Lopez is this super confident, overconfident, a bit on in a second, overconfident fighter. And I am telling you, when they came face-to-face, knowing the result, my golly gosh, he just stands there, Kambosos. He's bigger, he's taller, he's calmer, and he just stares brilliantly. He's so absolutely focused on Lopez. Lopez is all over the place. And young Jack, our producer, reminded me of something. He said, Bunce, you remember when we were in Las Vegas for Fury and Wilder 3, when we obviously you weren't there for that particular occasion. He said, remember we spoke to Lopez, and we did an interview with him. And Jack had said he was all over the place. And he was, Andy. Now, I know it was 6 or 7 weeks before the fight, but he didn't act, and he wasn't acting like an unbeaten, super hot, top 10 pound-for-pound fighter in a mandatory defense. He was completely all over the place, distracted to the point of to the point of worry or caution. So obviously, I'm adding all these things in afterwards, but they all add up to what we saw come the first bell at the Felt Forum, the old basement in Madison Square Garden. And we're at least building a case in our defence for having for not even suggesting that Kambosos can win. This might be the ultimate after-timing podcast that we've ever done, Andy, and you can be proud to be a member, a full member of the cast of it. Trust me, my son.
When the fight's over, it's so plainly simple and clear how they are. And you say, oh, well, that was always going to happen. But before, that's the beautiful thing about boxing, I guess. Never know the result, do you? No one knows whatever's going to happen, no matter how certain it looks.
Well, I'll tell you what, the only man who did seem to know exactly what the result would be was George Kambosos. Now, I managed to get hold of him about 14, 15 hours after he'd won the fight. He was wearing glasses because he was cut and bruised, but he was in, well, particularly good mood, as you'd imagine.
It was a very good victory, but, like I've been saying throughout this whole preparation, that I knew this was going to happen. I knew I was going to beat this kid. I knew I was going to win this fight. So, it's not a shock to me because I believed it so much. That's why it doesn't feel like, I've done it all. I'm going nuts. I can't believe it. No, it's just another day. At the end of the day, these belts, with or without them, I don't change. I still be the person I am, and I still have that belief no matter what. But we did it. We did it last night.
You certainly did do it, George, but it wasn't an easy night. I know you might have envisaged it. You did tell me 3 weeks ago exactly what would happen. You said it would be a hard fight. I'll come through it and win. And it was a hard fight. It was a brilliant fight. It was a great fight to watch. Was it an enjoyable fight to be in, George?
Yeah, it was. I loved it. I loved every moment of it. I love the fight game. I don't know if it's enjoyable for Lopez, but I loved it all. The shots that I was landing, I could hear him, wincing when I was hitting him to the body, the jabs, the frustration he was getting when I was just continually chipping away. When I put him on his ass in that first round, when he came out, I knew he would come out hard. I knew I'd just weather the storm, and I'm going to line him up because I knew he would make the mistake of coming a little bit too heavy, and I'll land that right hand. So, I chipped away, and I enjoyed every minute of the fight. Even when I got put down, I was smiling, and I said, okay, I made a mistake there. I was one that lost my composure for that split second. I got off my game plan. You know what? I got a little bit too excited for the fans, and I thought I could finish him at that time. But I got up, finished the round, went back to my corner, and said, you know what? I stuffed up there, but now I'm going to punish him for the next 2 rounds. And I think I had my best round of the fight in round 11, and round 12 finished off the show. So, I love the fight. It's a beautiful fight.
Listen, I did too, and I almost feel like going through it round by round. Just a quick little touch. That 11th was a masterclass, considering how long he had to, quote, finish you in the 10th, and then for you to come back in the 11th like he did. But I want to take you back to the first round. You said that you knew he'd come out. I think we all knew he'd come out. I think we all knew he had no respect for you. Let's get that absolutely right. Let's get that on the table. But he just threw everything at you. He just didn't care about anything. He just thought he was going to walk through you. And at 2 minutes and 40, even though you'd hit him with a couple of good counters, you were being forced back. You were being forced to think and work. And then, as you say, set himself a bit heavy, and you delivered that shot. I mean, it was just perfect timing, George. It was like something from a Rocky movie, something from a boxing fairy tale.
Yeah, look, I knew that he would come in heavy. I knew he would try to bully me around, and we were prepared to get through that first round and take whatever he took to me. But like the great Customato said to Muhammad Ali when he fought Fraser, hit him with your best right hand in the first round to get the respect. And I had that in my head. I'm reading a great book by Customato. And I knew that in my head that I'm going to hit this guy, and I was telling the whole team, I'm going to hit him early, I'm going to hit him hard, and you watch, he might be put down. And I lined him up. I saw him come heavy on the front foot, not really thinking of anything too much, had that chin up high. And it's a shot we have practiced time and time again in the gym. I got footage, and I will post that footage of the prior training that I've done to land that shot. And it was beautiful, it was pinpoint. And then when I put him down, I came flying in again, and I landed a beautiful right. If I was a little bit more on balance, I would have probably put him out because it was a clean shot, but a little bit off balance. But, when the bell went, I looked at him and I said, you know what? I'm still here, and I put you on your ass. That changed the fight. That was a very pivotal moment in the fight.
Now, obviously, after the fight, we had both the Lopez's talking about how easy it was for them. They can't believe how easy it was. They thought they won 10 of the 12 rounds, or even 12 of the 12 rounds. We had that. We had a build up where you were marginalised. You were stuck on the sidelines. Did you have a chance last night, away from the cameras, for you to have a face-to-face with Tio, and for you maybe to get a bit of his respect, a bit of a sense that he at least acknowledges what you did on the night?
Look, I think he's very delusional, like I said in the ring, very delusional. And I think he was actually a little bit concussed. I believe he was concussed from round one because he changed very quickly. The shots that I landed were like knives, sharp knives, splitting him open and busting him up and breaking him down. I said I would. The jabs alone, and I'm saying when I'm sparring welterweights and junior middleweights, I'm hitting them with jabs and they can't believe how hard I hit. I drop guys, big guys. So he was getting busted up from that jab alone, let alone the right hands and the body shots. So, look, I believe he's a little bit concussed, very delusional. But look, I don't need to sit here and try to justify my win. The world has saw my win. The world, his own fans were booing him. And that just shows, that just shows a person, If that was me on the other hand and someone beats me fair and square, you beat me, mate. That's it. It's done and dusted. It's a fight. It's a sport. It's going to happen. It is what it is. I'm never like that. I'm never a sore loser, but he just showed his true colors. And I'm not taking anything away from him. He beat the Lomachenko. He beat Komi. He beat Nakatani. He's had this big road. But I didn't feel nothing. I didn't feel the power. I've been in there with killers. I've been in there with Manny Pacquiao, who had so much good words to say last night. The power was nothing that could trouble me. My mistake in round 10 is what I stuffed up on, but it's a good learning curve too. And it showed the fighter I am to get up and come back even harder.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, since then, the inbox on your phone has been red hot with just about everybody above about 126 pounds fancying that they could move up and beat you. I mean, it's almost like you just about won. Give me a bit of respect. And suddenly every single person above super bantamweight fancies a bit of George Kambosos. Well, first of all, tell me they've got to go to Sydney to get a bit of you.
Yes, 100%. Look, when you are the hunter, that's how it is. But when you are the one being hunted, you're going to have a lot of people coming after you. But that's okay. On the back of my fight shorts, that word Molon Lave means if you want it, come and get it. But if you're coming to get it, be prepared to cop the same treatment that Lopez did last night. But you know what? I just made Lopez look very ordinary. So they think, I can beat Kambosos too. But why didn't Lopez do it? But this is a guy that just beat Lomachenko and made him look ordinary. 2020 fight of the year. So where does that put me? I don't get too bothered with what people want to say. We got a plan now. We got all the belts. It's going to be down under. And I'm looking forward to next week to seeing what Haney does. And then we will sit down and hopefully get that fight done.
Now, will you go ringside for Diaz against Haney, or will you fly back to your family in Sydney? Because I know you've had such a long, interrupted 6 or 7 months. So what will you do? Will you stay another 8 or so days in the USA, or will you get back to the family? George, what's the plan?
Yeah. I believe so. I believe I will stay.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to stay. Get yourself out to Las Vegas. Get your glasses off. In my opinion, I'm not teaching you how to suck eggs. Shake some hands and let people know what you're about. Be fantastic.
Of course. And look, I got all the belts. I'm the lightweight champion. And, I will sit there. I will scope it out, and then we'll get back on the plane, go home. And make the right
welcome.
decision. I will see my kids. That's the most important thing for me right now.
And George, you did it in the Garden. You did it at Madison Square Garden in New York City, the scene of some of the greatest fights in boxing history. Does that make it a little bit sweeter to you, George? Because I get the sense you're a boxing connoisseur, you're a boxing historian, you're a boxing fan.
I am. I really am. And just to do it at that iconic, venue. But to think of the way I did it, a masterclass and broke this kid down round by round and busted him up. This is a guy in his prime, just beat Lomachenko, undisputed champion of the world. But it's not like he's from somewhere else. He's from here.
He's local.
So when I stepped on top of that canvas and I looked at all the fans and they were booing me, and in my head I said, okay, you boo me now, but by the end of this fight you will applaud me. So in that round 12, when the fight was finished and I stood on the ropes, And I put my hands up and I said, I am the champion now. This blood is for you guys. They applauded. They were crying. They had their hands. They were so happy. The flags, they were excited. I mean, so that is a true champion, like the Gladiators, like the movie Gladiator.
You know what, George, I love it. Final question. I've got to ask you this. Lee Selby pushed you when you thought it was a hard fight, a close fight, a split decision. Could tell me that Lee Selby's on the shopping list for a fight in Sydney and a glorious homecoming for George Kambosos. Come on, George. Do the right thing.
Look, I think we've got bigger fish to fry now. But look, full respect to Lee. I've never said a bad word about him since our fight was done. You know, the lessons I learned in that fight. And I don't believe the fight was nowhere near close. And the way I boxed, he's a very good boxer, Lee. He's big, he's rangy, he moves very well. I knew Lopez would be better fitted for my style, and styles make fights. Lee's a crafty technician. But I outboxed him that night as well, picked him apart, and full respect to the guy. I'm sure he is happy because we had a good fight. And I respect these guys. These guys have been my opponents. These guys have got me to the next level. And we'll see. We'll see if he picks up another good win. It might be there. There might be a rematch there. That's all to be said. But like I said, I don't duck or dodge anybody. I'll fight anyone, anytime. But I want to fight back home now. I've earned that.
And you have earned it. George, I know you don't duck or dive or avoid anybody. It was a privilege talking to you a couple of weeks ago. It's been a privilege talking to you today. And it was even more of a privilege watching you beat Teofimo Lopez. George, congratulations on winning all of those belts. But more than that, of standing up and doing it the proper way and the hard way, the boxing way. George, congratulations.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Earn it the hard way. I love it.
George Kambosos there in great form, as you'd imagine. It was a fairy tale in New York, Andy, to paraphrase bits of a song, and to listen to him there. I'm not sure we'd get. I asked him if he was leaving America. I'm not sure we'd get him out of the Madison Square Garden area, and who can blame him? I think if I was him, I'd be in there an hour before I get on a plane. He loved that fight, didn't he?
Yeah, there's one thing about him. There's to him, isn't he? And a purpose. He's a very determined fella. And listen, he's done it. He's went into the Lions Den, 4-7 here in the UK, and now gone and fought the unified champion, the superstar, in the Madison Square Garden. So yeah, he does deserve a homecoming. And
there's no shortage of a list. I mean, I joked with him there, but people on Twitter and people have been contacting him directly. Half a dozen, maybe even more. And I'd love to see him have a big fight back in Australia. I think it'd be absolutely brilliant. And then perhaps one of the bigger Americans, obviously this weekend in Las Vegas, Joseph Diaz gets to fight Devin Haney. Haney obviously favoured to win the vacant WBC lightweight title. But then there's other fighters. Ryan Garcia's thrown his name in the ring. Obviously the winner of Richard Comey against Lomachenko would fancy it. I think he's ruled himself out, Lopez. He said he's definitely going to be moving up in weight. Wouldn't surprise me if he jumps up a couple of weights, to be honest with you, or certainly to a big light welter. So fights about 10-4, 10-3, something like that.
Well, it's a matter of putting them all together, isn't it? And just hopefully it's not one of those things that we see when none of them actually do fight each other because one loses and the other one gets beat. And it's just important that these guys fight each other sooner or later, or hopefully sooner. And
the great thing about, let's be honest here. The great thing about Kambosos is they'll all fancy Kambosos because everything's going to get put down to Teofimo having a dreadful night, Teofimo having the worst night of his life. That's you lived inside the American boxing system with all your years at the Kronk, and you know that's going to be the mentality. The mentality's going to be that the American Teofimo, the world champion Teofimo, the unbeaten superstar pound-for-pound guy, he's the one that got it all wrong. And Kambosos will go back to Australia. Imagine if he goes back to Australia and creates a fortress. He's got lots of belts. I've given up trying to count how many belts he's got. I think it would be absolutely brilliant for him to go back to Australia and to do some kind of relaunch of Australian boxing. It'd be brilliant, Andy.
Tim Tszyu there now, Costa Tszyu's son. Brock Jarvis and Dempsey McKean. There's a few names, and they could be built all on his undercard. They could build something, especially with the zone looking to launch in Australia, or he could be the fighter they build their platform around.
Hey, listen, and you know what? He'd be the ideal fighter to build a platform around, as far as I can tell, because when you look back on it, and we hear it now, I say again, it's a little bit more after timing. The guy talks so well, and the guy's done it. You know, he came to the UK, beat Selby in the UK, tight decision. And he went into literally to Lopez's backyard. I mean, it's interesting what he's saying there. He could sense the hostility, but he knew at the end he'd won them over. I like that from those particular fans. Now, and I'm gonna ask you now. It's a simple question. When did you first hear that Amir Khan was going to be fighting Kell Brook? Can you remember whether you were 6 or 7 in junior school, or you're a little bit older? Because I tell you what, it feels like that, doesn't it?
Feels like that, yeah. But I'm glad that they're finally getting it on, even though it's well past probably its best before date, you know. But it's still a good fight, still an entertaining fight, and there's still a lot to prove from both men.
I'm with you completely on that. I mean, I think they're 30 odd years of age each, 35 and 34. That can't be 35. They'll both be 35 on the night. Similar amounts of fights. So, Andy, their last 2 fights or whatever, let's have a look at it. Kell Brook gets stopped late last year by Terence Crawford in one of Bob Arum's bubbles in Las Vegas. And he wasn't at the races. Gets swabbled and stopped on his feet. Completely gone. There's no idea where he is. And he looks old man. He looks slow. I didn't like the look of him. Okay. Amir Khan, in his 2 fights ago, back in April of 2019, or maybe it was May of 2019, and in Madison Square Garden, gets stopped by Terence Crawford. Gives it a good go. He's in the fight, and then he suddenly succumbs and he gets stopped. I think it's the 6th round. He retires after 6 rounds. He's had 1 fight since then, Amir Khan. Some kind of fight stroke exhibition stroke whatever it is, payday in Dubai against the Australian Billy Dibb. As I say, by then Amir Khan will be 35. Kell Brook is 35. Kell Brook's had 42 fights, won a world title a few years ago. Amir Khan's won a couple of world titles, and he's had 39 fights. So I ask you, Andy Lee, who's got the most left, do you think? Big question, that, by the way.
When you look at not just the last fights, Brook stepped up to fight Golovkin. He was doing okay, and then didn't end well. Fractured eye socket, and then he fought Spence, and the same outcome, different eye socket. And since then, he's fought Porter. He's fought Crawford, and that was a punish. You know, he didn't look the best in that fight. But and Khan has stepped up to fight Canelo and suffered a devastating knockout in that fight. So they've both got a lot of miles on the clock in terms of who's got most left. But we go back to the mentality of fights and how you feel going into it, and how you're preparing, and what's in between your ears, and how you're thinking. They'll be more motivated for this fight than they have been in a long time. So, yeah, I think if both of them can get through their training camps, you know, they probably need light sparring. I'm not saying they're not like that goods or they're that vulnerable. They're both former world champions and still great fighters, but they need to turn up fresh, not have too grueling of training camps, and turn up fresh for the fight. And you know, Khan, he's got a lot of experience. He's been around, hasn't he? Like, he's trained in America with a lot of different coaches, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But isn't he training with Crawford at the moment?
I think if he isn't at the moment, he was up until recently. You're right about that. Lots of miles on the clock. Kell Brook turning pro in 2000, I think about 2004. First won the British title 2008. Amir Khan turning pro in 2005. And just listen, you mentioned 1 or 2 of the names there, Andy, but just listen to the list of fighters these two have shared the ring with. Crawford, Canelo, Triple G, Sean Porter, Colazzo, Devon Alexander, Chris Algieri, Zab Judah, Lamont Peterson, Danny Garcia, Carlos Molina, Marcus Madana, Paulie Malignaggi, and Marco Antonio Barrera. In addition to having a fair few domestic dust-ups, these two between them, with their whatever it comes to 80-odd fights, they've been in a lot of top of the bills. They've been in a lot of training camps, and you just subtly dropped it there, providing they can get through the training camps. That's the absolute truth. They can't be having hard sessions. They can't be having really problematic, draining training camps with grueling sparring where they have to each lose too much weight, because they'll have nothing left come the first bell in Manchester on the 19th of February. I think it'll be really be a real sign of intent to see who and where they complete their training camps with and where they actually take place. I'm with you, Andy. I really like this fight. Of course, it's too late for it to be a potential classic in that sense, but this is one of those fights that I'm going to really enjoy. I hope I'm working at it, but if I'm not, it'll be one of those fights that I fancy a night out. So perhaps, if you're not on the zone duty in, I don't know, Mexico, where Costello's been recently, or Bolivia or somewhere, or wherever they've got a show, but if we're not working on this show, let's have a night out in Manchester and go and watch this, because I think it'll be a lot of fun.
The thing is about it, Steve, it might be past their best, but these two, they're at similar stages, you know, in terms of what they're physically capable of.
Great point.
It still could make for a classic fight. It still could make for a classic fight where there's a number of knockdowns and one guy gets back up and knocks the other guy down. So it could still be a good fight to watch.
And I just hope that once it's over, they either have a rematch, because what I don't want to see either of these two becoming is a gatekeeper in any way, shape or form. They've given us, as I went through that list there, I don't know for certain, but if I look at Amir Khan, I look at Kell Brook, 80 fights between them. I bet you they've had, I'm going to go for it, I bet you they've had 35, maybe even 40 top of the bills over the last 10 or 12 years. That's an awful lot of nights and an awful lot of entertainment. In fact, they might have even had more than that. That's going some, Andy, isn't it?
Yeah, Khan's been topping bills since he was...
Well, since he yes. So Amir Khan, of his 39 fights, I'm probably underselling him. I'm probably underselling him. I reckon he's probably... Amir Khan's probably had 37 top of the bills. And Kell Brook's definitely had 20 plus. Amir Khan against Kell Brook, 19th of February in Manchester next year. By the way, Andy, let me just run this by you. What a great first 6 or 7 weeks to next year. We've got the rearranged Chris Eubank, Liam Williams fight on January the 29th, which I think I love that fight. We've got the rearranged Josh Taylor against Jack Catterall fight for all 4 of the light welterweight belts in Glasgow on the 26th of February, and I like that one. And this is the one I particularly like. Callum Johnson getting a second crack at a world title against Joe Smith in Verona, New York on January the 15th, WBO light heavyweight, which I've got to be honest with. And then we've got Kell Brook against Khan. I think 4 fights like that in a 6 or 7 week period, that's not a bad start to any year. Anyway, sticking with the light heavyweights, last December, there was a fight at a really bizarre place called Church House. It was a really strange building behind the Houses of Parliament in central London. It was in the round, and it was during hefty COVID time, so there were very few people there. And we had back-to-back weekends. The first weekend was Daniel Dubois against Joe Joyce, which was, I still think that was just an electrifying fight. It was just, you couldn't take your eyes off it. And then the following week was Lyndon Arthur against Anthony Yarde. Most people fancied Yarde quite heavy. Boxing News suggested that Yarde would take care of Lyndon after 7 or 8 rounds. And then there were stories about Lyndon having a problem with his right arm. Well, on the night, in fact, 10 minutes before they went to the ring, Lyndon injured his right arm quite badly, quite severely, so much so that he didn't really throw a worthwhile right hand until about the 9th round. Now, they're fighting again this Saturday, Saturday the 4th, at the Copper Box Arena in the Olympic Park in East London. First of all, what was your take on last year's fight, the first fight, which ended in a split decision, but the right man won? Lyndon Arthur kept his unbeaten record and beat Yarde last year. What was your thoughts and feelings around that fight last year, Andy?
Well, I was there working with you, Steve, for BT at the time, and yeah, I thought the right man won, and it was a beautiful display of boxing from the jab. The jab, the importance of a jab, and how effective it can be. Even though it's the first and most basic punch you learn in the gym, if you can dedicate yourself to it and use it correctly, it can win you a fight. And it did this time. We go back again to the mentality of 2 fighters stepping into the and people believe in hype. One guy expecting a hard fight, and then one probably expecting, this will just be another outing for me. I'll just do what I do, and somehow I'll win. When you got coming up against somebody who's going in there with the right mentality, also with the right game plan. But then when you throw in that he injured his hand before they're going into the ring, yeah, how do you? There's no game plan for that. That just shows complete mental toughness. But this still has. I think this can be an excellent fight. This is this could be potentially fight of the year again. You know, one of those matches where you have so much on the line again from two guys, and so much talking been done by the two camps and the two coaches, and well, one coach in particular. But there's just so much on the line, isn't it, in terms of pride and reputation, more so than the belts and your record. So these type of fights, they usually bring the best out. I'm not sure which way I lean, because the first one was very close. You'd imagine if Yarde has two arms, he'd do a better job. But would he get away from his jab that was so effective if he's got the right hand? And you got to expect a different approach from Yarde this time. You're going to have to expect more intensity, or I don't know. Can he? Just the fact that he couldn't deal with a jab.
You know what, Andy? Just listening to your last 60 seconds there perfectly sums up, I think, what people are expecting going into this fight. We've got one guy who didn't fight as well as he should have, but still thought he won clearly, and had a great last round where he rocked and wobbled Lyndon a couple of times, although Lyndon did survive, and survived in the end comfortably to the final bell. And then we got Lyndon fighting and never making an excuse. I tried to get it out of him in the post-fight interview, and he wouldn't say I injured my arm. He wouldn't say it. Now he's got two arms. He told me, we're going to hear from him in a second. He's got two arms, and he still feels slighted that he hasn't managed to get the respect his due. Yarde believes that, that this is just a nuisance to get him out the way and then move on to the world title fights that are out there, including one that Callum Johnson's got that could have, and he will rightly believe Yarde could have been his. So there's so many aspects to this, so many layers to this, that I'm starting to get a little bit excited about it. As I say, I caught up with Lyndon the other day and grabbed hold of him. And the first question I asked him was a simple question. Did he really expect that there would actually be a rematch?
You know what? I probably knew at some point it would. Obviously, when I first beat him, I thought that I'd be going on to fight for world titles and stuff like that, like Frank said. But I don't mind. This is probably the best fight, best money-paying fight and stuff for me right now, considering like the situation and scenario. So it don't really make a difference to me.
With Yarde this time, it was always going to be a competitive fight. Do you see any different this time? Have you seen anything in him, or do you feel that with two better arms, you can make it easier? What do you sense going into this fight?
Not seeing anything better with him, because he's not done anything. He's had a round with a middleweight he disposed of, which was expected, and then I know exactly what he's going to do. He's going to come out, he's going to try and start fast, he's going to try and take my jab away, he's going to get close, and he's going to gas out, and I'm going to probably stop him. And if I don't, I don't, but that's my plan. So,
okay, do you think there's any danger, any chance that he'll bring a little bit more to the table than that? Maybe just, a little bit of care and thought?
Of course. But if he stays off me, I'm going to box his head off. He can't stay in there and box with me. He knows he can't. It's impossible. He cannot outbox me. He's going to have to fight me. But they're under the influence that I can't fight. They're also under the influence that I'm a lazy fighter and won't go with them when they try and go. But we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it is odd speaking sometimes sometimes I speak to trainers and fighters, and they'll say things about an opponent, and I think that sounds a bit naive. And sometimes when I hear Anthony Yarde and Tundi talking, I think I'm not saying overlooking you, but I think they think there's only one way you can fight. Is that fair?
They're delusional. Do you know what's mad, yeah? They said, so before they didn't knock me out, they was guaranteed a knockout. In fact, I heard Tundi say to John Riley on the press conference, put your house on it, it's a knockout. Put your house on it. That's what he said. So that tells me that 100% they was going for a knockout. Because let's not forget, before the Dex Spellman fight, yeah, Andy Yarde called my fight boring because it went 12 rounds, yeah? So what does that tell you? That means his style is not anybody he gets in the ring without. Then after he boxed me and I made him go 12 rounds, it's, because I boxed a different way and I've gone 12 rounds and because I not knocked him out, everyone, no, you told everyone you was going to knock me out. Your whole thing is based on we don't wait for people, we're knocking people out. But then when I didn't get knocked out by him, it's, we wanted to do 12 rounds. And it's mad because I actually feel like they've made themselves believe that I didn't make him box like that. They've made himself believe that he actually could have knocked me out if he wanted to. It's delusion. It's delusion.
But that's actually pure delusion in the sense that, he believes, he'll look me in the eye and he'll say, don't worry, I'm doing everything. I'm in control and I'll knock him out this time. I needed 12 rounds last time. I mean, I actually think that in his heart, he believes that, Lyndon. As crazy as it might sound, I think he believes that.
This is what I'm saying. They don't want 12. How can you sit on a conference call or whatever he did last time, yeah? Or what tag saying, the fight was boring. Then let's not forget, after I didn't knock Dux Spellman out, he went and knocked him out to prove a point that going 12 rounds is boring. Well, then when he gets in with me, 12 rounds isn't boring anymore, and you want to box to a victory. What kind of, like, in what world, even if you believe you might knock me out now, make it make sense. What world does that make sense? It doesn't. So even if you do believe that you're going to knock me out this time, don't act like you didn't want to go, you wanted to go 12 rounds last time, because you didn't, and you never did, and you never do. Hence why, Tunde, make it, achieve it, believe it, and see it, and whatever they want to say, yeah, and touch gloves and all that. That's why they do that, because now we're going to go and knock him out. Well, let's come and knock me out. And if you do it, you do it. You're the better man on the night. But it's going to be a hard task for you. I'll tell you that now.
Lyndon, listen, thanks for your time. Last question. Is it fair to say that for this fight, you're even more focused than you were 11 and a half months ago?
No, because I was focused then, like I'm mass amounts, because it was. I'm just as focused as I was then. Now, let's not forget that my task is still the same. I want to be a world champion. This is not it, and this is not the final for me. Yeah, the first time I fought him, it was scary, because he can knock you out. The second time I'm going to fight him, it's scary because he can knock you out. I'm just as sharp in the mind, just as sharp in the. I'm ready for a fight. I'm ready for the first war I was ready for in the first fight, but it never happened because apparently I'm a boring fighter. But you're not the boring fighter, and I box what I wanted to do. I box. That's what I do. Everyone knows that's what I do. That's my thing. I can hit hard and I can knock you out, but I box. Initially, I box. You're supposed to knock me out, whatever. I'm boring. What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to stay close to mid-range and let him bottom? Is that what I'm supposed to do?
You're not stupid.
Come on now. Exactly. It makes sense.
So, Andy, Lyndon Arthur, they're quite fired up, throwing challenges without really throwing challenges, and saying quite sensibly to Anthony Yarde, well, if I'm so boring, why did I beat you? Why did I beat you? I mean, Lyndon Arthur, I think, is quietly confident that with two hands, he can get the job done. And of course, Anthony Yarde is quite confident that with two brains in his corner, both Tunde Ajayi, who's been at loggerheads with Pat Barrett in the Lyndon Arthur camp, but the other man is James Cook, the former British and European champion, one of those great guys from the 80s and 90s who never even fought for a world title. And he's been brought in to, as James Cook told me about 6 or 7 months ago, to tell them the things they don't want to hear, i.e. that they need to be doing more of this and more of that. And I think that even adds the layers to this fight. The layers. I think, hand on heart, Lyndon Arthur can't see how he can lose. And I think, hand on heart, Anthony Yarde can't see any way he can lose. And that always is a good cocktail for a good fight.
Yep. And we're just picking up on what Lyndon Arthur said there. It's the name of the game, isn't it? Boxing, and hit and not get hit. It's not about standing there and trading, and you hit me with your best shot and I'll hit you with my best shot. And if you're so good, you got to deal with what I'm bringing. If you're so good, you got to deal with this boxing, this movement, this long jab, and then this right hand coming behind it. So it is an intriguing rematch. And rematches are always, you just don't know. There's a cocktail of, you always look at the first fight, but how much can you go off the first fight in terms of, this is a completely different scenario now where, yeah, the minds always
It
different.
has to be a different mindset because Yarde's going to come out of first gear a bit quicker and let his hands go a bit quicker because there's too many rounds he lost by admiring his work and not working enough. And Arthur's going to be able to use a hand he couldn't use in the first fight. But I take on board your other fear is if he thinks about the right hand too much, does that mean he might neglect using the left, which was good enough for him to win the first fight? So Andy, I know that you're saying it's too close to call, and you've already backed out of giving me a winner for the Amir Khan and Brook fight. I'm scared to ask you for a win of the Teofimo Lopez and George Kambosos fight, but hey ho, as they say in the trade, give me a steer. Just give us a slight steer on your gut feeling for Saturday at the Copper Box. Yarde and Arthur 2.
Rematches are all about who can adjust and make small adjustments can have big effects. And I wonder, with the noise that's coming out of the Yarde camp, have they really assessed the performance? Have they really looked at why they didn't win the first time round? Because a lot of it is denial, and a lot of it is, what looks like from the outside, blowing smoke, and failure to accept the defeat and assess it, and that's the only way you're going to learn. So I still. Lyndon Arthur's got the first win, and I probably slightly edge him to win the second one again, but it's still a close fight.
No, it's a close fight. It's a good fight. It's a technical fight, a tactical fight, and I think we might see something a little bit special. Listen, Andy, before I let you go, obviously you're up in Morecambe. You're in Tyson Fury country. You've got Joseph Parker there. Did I see that Joseph Parker's partner and his girls have arrived?
They arrived, yeah. They just arrived a few days ago. And that's nice for him to feel a little bit more comfortable here, and not to have one less worry, because when they're 12 hours away, and you're worried about anything that can happen or go wrong or being so far away. So they're in their apartment across the hallway from us, and at least he knows it. He has peace of mind now that they're there and they're safe. And he's trained extremely hard as he did before, but this time we have more time together. More times to ingrain the habits and make things instinctual, and hoping that if he can emulate what he does in the gym, then he should have a very good night against Chisora.
Yeah, that's December the 18th. And interesting thing, that fight is obviously on 5 Live. It'll be live on BBC 5 Live. What's interesting about Parker is his age. He's still only 29, if I'm not mistaken. We sometimes forget that. We just think about all these guys being 33, 34, 35, but he is still relatively young in heavyweight terms. And the rest, I've seen different pictures of all the boys together. Tyson looks to me in terrific shape, considering it's 6 weeks after a fight and probably 3 or 4 months before a fight. Has he been in the gym with Joseph, and might he do some work with Joseph before this fight?
Yeah, I don't think they'll spar, but they were in the gym. Joseph was doing his strength, and we had a couple of guys sparring there, and everyone was getting involved in cheerleading and giving different tactics. So there's a great atmosphere, and Tyson, the inspiration to everyone around him in terms of where you should be and what you should try to emulate in terms of, again, the mindset. That's what separates Tyson from everybody. How he thinks and how his approach to fighting. And if Joseph can, even if 10% of that can rub off on Joseph, then it's going to be a massive benefit to him.
And you mentioned earlier on the other cruiserweights you've got in the gym. Has Tyson, has Tommy been there? Young Tommy been in and around the gym? Because he's still a novice. He's still a learner. He can learn from your guys.
There's obviously Tyson, Joseph, Jordan Thompson, David Nika, Isaac Lowe, and Tommy's here, and what an environment to be in. And it's a fantastic. I mean, there's been different kids coming in, sparring everybody, and mixing in, and on day with people who want to come to spar them. So no, it's a great environment. Tommy's doing really well. He's in a big fight, and it's tough. I still think it's a tough fight because of the experience and the occasion. It's going to be a massive occasion up there, the event. He should be beating Jake Paul. He should be beating him in terms of, from what I can see in the ring and what I've seen of Jake Paul, the 15 or 20 seconds I've watched of him, not a real boxer,
And it's interesting you should say that, because I was in Las Vegas for Caleb Plant against Canelo Alvarez. And on the day of the fight, there was a press conference. And Tommy had to come home the day before because I think his mother was poorly. So Tommy wasn't there, but Jake Paul was. But Jake Paul was late. I think that's Jake Paul's weight. So it was in this fancy sort of restaurant in one of those new fancy hotels, and I was there quite early setting up with the camera, and I sat down and have a coffee, and in front of me, I was facing a wall. I was being classically antisocial. I was facing a wall, and on this wall was a giant screen, a massive, like 8 foot by 5 foot screen. And they were showing a rerun of Jake Paul's previous fight. And I watched it from start to finish twice. It's 8-round fight. I watched it. I watched his footwork. I watched the way he reacted when he was hit. I watched what he did. I looked for subtleties, little things. And I've got to tell you, previous to that, I'd watched, like you, a 20-second clip. I watched it and I thought, this guy is a lot better than I thought. And he's only a 3 or 4 bout. He's basically, it's two kids under 6 or 7 fights, novices, 2 novices. Well, I looked at that Jake Paul thing. Then later on I interviewed him, and he wants you to believe he doesn't take this seriously. He wants you to believe he's just a YouTuber with a set of abdominal muscles. He wants you to believe that this is going to be the hardest fight of my life because I'm finally fighting someone that's a traditional boxer instead of a basketball star or a UFC star. But I watched him in that fight. I watched his feet, I watched his balance, I watched the way he reacted, and listen, I was a lot more impressed than I wanted to be. Let's leave it at that. I didn't want to be impressed. I wanted to think he's just a big, raw, stiff YouTube bozo. I can say bozo, won't get taken off air. Anyway, I'll leave you with that thought. Not the nicest thought in the world, but hey ho, that's the way it goes. And Andy, before I let you go, there used to be a guy called Costello. This is not a rhyme. There was once a guy called Costello. He worked on this channel with me. He wasn't a bad fellow. He went over to the zone to make plenty of money. He ended up in Mexico. How is he doing? That nearly worked. How's Costello doing?
Costello's doing great. And we worked together many times with you on the radio, and now it's great to be reunited with him on TV. And he's not on social media, so he doesn't get to see it, but I get tagged in a lot of stuff. He's tagged, they're complimenting him, and the reviews, as always, as you'd expect. Mike's just a class act and a true professional, and a true student of the game.
And we will have updates on Costello's journey back from Mexico, because at the moment, obviously, he's gone missing. But if he's not found in the next week or so, I can assure you, we'll do an update. We'll find him. We'll find him.
He's just got to make it to Liverpool on the 11th. As long as he's back by then, he'll be all right.
He's just ripping the proverbial out of it. Don't worry about that. He's sunning himself somewhere in a convertible going in Baja, California. Andy, it's been a pleasure and a delight having you on today. And I'll see you, as I say, we'll see you in Liverpool on the 11th for Conor Benn.
See you guys. Thanks for having me on.
So thanks to Andy Lee, thanks to the new champion and the king of shocks, George Kambosos. Thanks, obviously, to Lyndon Arthur. It's a delight that we've got Kell Brook and Amir Khan. We'll be back next week, and thanks to you for listening. We will be back next week. We'll be throwing ahead to that fight I mentioned there to Andy Lee. Conor Benn's coming out party against Chris Algieri. I think it's a really tough fight. It's a really intriguing fight. I've been Steve Bunce. This has been the 5 Live Boxing Podcast. Thanks for taking the time to listen.
Let's get ready to rumble!
5 Live Boxing.